My dear ones, let me tell you a story that still weighs heavy on my heart, though it has been many years since it happened. It is not easy for me to share, but I believe that sometimes when we open our wounds and let others see them, we also find healing. My story takes place in New York, a city that is alive with lights, energy, and endless movement. But even in such a place where everything seems so alive, hearts can still break quietly in the dark. Mine did one cold spring evening, just before what was supposed to be the happiest day of my marriage. You see, I had been married to my husband, Daniel, for almost 10 years. We had met in the city when I was still very young, and I thought at that time that love was something like the movies showed, sweeping, dramatic, filled with big promises and grand gestures. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he had charm. He knew how to make a woman feel special. When he smiled at me in those early days, I believed I was the only woman in his world. He worked as a real estate agent, always busy, always out meeting clients, always running from one appointment to another. I worked in a little flower shop, arranging roses, lilies, and tulips for stranger celebrations, never realizing that my own happiness would soon wither. We had made it a tradition to celebrate our anniversary in a special way every year. The first year we went to a little Italian restaurant downtown where we could hardly afford the pasta but laughed as if we owned the world. The second year we went on a boat ride, just the two of us, floating along the Hudson River while the city sparkled around us. By the 10th year, I thought our love had matured into something steady, unshakable. I believed the bond between us was strong enough to last forever. So when our 10th anniversary approached, I poured my whole heart into planning it. I wanted it to be special, memorable, something that would remind us of all the years we had shared and all the dreams we still carried. I booked a table at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline. I had even bought him a special gift, a watch he had admired months ago but never bought for himself. I saved up quietly for it, every dollar tucked away, because I wanted him to know that he was worth every sacrifice. I had even bought a new dress, a soft blue one, because he once told me blue was his favorite color on me. But fate has a cruel way of showing us truths we do not wish to see. The night before our anniversary, Daniel told me he had to stay late at work. It was nothing unusual. He often had late meetings or showings. Still, something inside me felt unsettled. He didn't kiss me before leaving like he usually did, and his eyes seemed distracted. I tried to shake it off, telling myself not to be paranoid. Love, after all, is built on trust, and I trusted him with my whole heart. But as the hours ticked by, and the clock moved past 9, then 10, then midnight, I began to worry. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through my tears. Something didn't feel right. Finally, I decided to call his office. His secretary, who was always kind to me, answered in a sleepy voice, and when I asked if Daniel was still at work, she hesitated, then said softly, "No, dear, he left hours ago." My heart sank. I don't know what compelled me, but I felt my hands tremble as I grabbed my coat and left our apartment. The streets of New York were busy even at that hour, cabs rushing by, people laughing outside bars and restaurants, the city alive as ever. But inside I felt empty, cold, and afraid. I walked without knowing where I was going, my feet moving faster than my mind could think. It was then, by some cruel twist of fate, that I saw him. There he was, my Daniel, standing outside a hotel on the Upper East Side. And he wasn't alone. He was holding a woman, her laughter spilling into the night, her hand tucked into his as if it belonged there. My husband leaned in close, kissed her forehead, and for a moment I saw in his eyes the same look he used to give me, the look that once made me believe I was the only woman in the world. My knees felt weak, my breath caught in my throat, and my heart cracked in two. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to him, to demand answers, to shake him and ask how he could betray me so deeply on the eve of our anniversary. But instead, I stood frozen, hidden in the shadows of a doorway, my body trembling, my tears burning hot against my cheeks. The city noises faded, and all I could hear was the shattering sound of my own heart. I watched as they walked inside the hotel together, hand in hand, disappearing through the doors as if they were the rightful couple, as if I was the stranger. And in that moment, I felt something inside me die. The night before my anniversary, the night before I was ready to celebrate 10 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion, my husband was with another woman. The truth was right in front of me, undeniable, cruel, and merciless. I stumbled back home, my legs barely carrying me. I curled up on the bed that still smelled of him, clutching the watch I had bought as his gift, and cried until morning. And that, my dear ones, was the night my marriage truly ended, even before I found the strength to say the words out loud. The morning after that dreadful night was the hardest morning of my life. I woke up with swollen eyes, my head heavy, and my body trembling as though I had been through a storm. The sun was shining brightly through the curtains, as if mocking me. Outside, the world carried on. Cars honked, people rushed to work, children laughed on their way to school. But inside my home, everything had collapsed. My marriage, my trust, my belief in forever, it all lay broken at my feet. Daniel came home just before dawn. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, and for a moment I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was someone else I had seen. Maybe my eyes had tricked me in the darkness. My heart still wanted to believe in him, even when my mind screamed that I had seen the truth. He walked in quietly, as if trying not to wake me, but I was sitting in the living room waiting. My hands clutched the gift box with the watch inside, and my whole body shook with anger, pain, and fear of what I already knew. He froze when he saw me sitting there. His hair was messy, his tie loosened, and his eyes had that tired, guilty look I had never noticed before but recognized instantly now. "Where were you, Daniel?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. He hesitated, then forced a smile, the same smile he had used to charm me years ago. "Work ran late. I'm sorry, sweetheart. You should have gone to bed." Those words, those lies, pierced through me. I stood up and walked closer to him, my eyes never leaving his face. "Don't lie to me," I whispered. "I saw you." His smile faltered. His body stiffened. "What do you mean?" he asked, but his voice cracked. "I saw you outside that hotel," I said, my voice trembling. "I saw you with her." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. The kind of silence that tells you the truth without a single word spoken. His eyes dropped, and I knew. That was the moment I knew there was no mistake, no misunderstanding, no way back. My husband, the man I had loved for 10 years, had betrayed me. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought to keep my voice steady. "Do you know what tomorrow is, Daniel? It's our anniversary. 10 years. 10 years of love, sacrifice, and trust. And the night before, you were with another woman." He tried to speak, tried to explain, but every word he uttered felt like poison. "It was a mistake," he said. "It didn't mean anything. Please, don't throw everything away over one bad choice." One bad choice. That's what he called it. But to me, it wasn't just a bad choice. It was the breaking of a promise, the destruction of a bond, the tearing apart of my very soul. How could he reduce my pain, our love, to something so small? I wanted to scream, to throw the gift at him, to demand why he did this to me. Instead, I opened the box slowly and showed him the watch I had saved for months to buy. "This was supposed to be your gift," I said, my voice breaking. "I wanted you to know how much I love you, but now I see it was never enough for you." Daniel looked at the watch, then back at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of being caught, fear of consequences. That hurt me more than anything. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry for being found out. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't speak. I just sat in our home, staring at the walls that once felt warm but now felt like a prison. I thought about all the years we had spent together, the first time he held my hand, the nights we stayed up dreaming of our future, the way he used to surprise me with flowers from my own shop just to see me smile. Were those moments real? Or were they just illusions, masks he wore until he no longer cared to keep them on? By evening, he tried again to talk to me. "We can get past this," he said softly. "We can start over. Don't throw everything away." But I looked at him, and all I could see was the image of him holding her hand, kissing her forehead, walking into that hotel as if I didn't exist. The betrayal burned inside me like fire. "No, Daniel," I whispered. "You threw it away. Not me." That night, while the city lights sparkled outside and couples dined in restaurants celebrating love, I sat alone on my bed, clutching my pillow, trying to breathe through the pain. My 10th anniversary had arrived, but instead of joy and celebration, I was drowning in heartbreak. And that, my dear ones, was how I began to face the truth, that sometimes the people we give our whole hearts to are the very ones who break them. And when trust is gone, love alone cannot save what is broken. But my story does not end there. No, it was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would test my strength, my courage, and my very sense of who I was without him. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. You see, heartbreak does not come like a storm that passes quickly. No, it lingers, it clings to your skin. It sits heavy in your chest. Every morning, I woke up with the memory of what I had seen. Every night, I closed my eyes only to relive that moment when Daniel walked into that hotel with another woman. The pain was constant, like a shadow I could not escape. At first, I told myself I needed to decide what to do. Should I forgive him? Should I stay and try to mend the cracks in our marriage? Or should I walk away from 10 years of my life and start again alone? These questions circled in my mind endlessly, leaving me restless and tired. Daniel, on the other hand, acted as though nothing had happened. He went to work, came home, tried to smile at me, and carried on with his routines. It was as if he expected me to simply forget, to erase the memory, to pretend that our love was untouched. But I couldn't. I couldn't look at him without seeing her. I couldn't hear his voice without remembering the lies he had told me. And I couldn't touch him without feeling the cold distance that now stood between us. One evening, about a week after our anniversary, he came home with flowers, roses, bright red, the kind that usually made me smile. He handed them to me with a hopeful look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I made a mistake. Let's move forward. Please." I looked at those roses, and for the first time in my life they felt like thorns. I had spent years working in a flower shop, wrapping bouquets for men to give to women they loved. But now I knew that flowers could not hide betrayal. They could not mend what was broken. I set them on the table without a word, my heart heavy with disappointment. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the city. The streets were alive, filled with laughter and movement, but I felt like an invisible ghost trapped in silence. And as I sat there, I asked myself a question that changed everything. Who am I without him? For 10 years, I had been Daniel's wife. I had built my life around his needs, his dreams, his happiness. I had loved him so much that I forgot to love myself. And now, when he had betrayed me, I realized I had no idea who I was anymore. That realization frightened me, but it also gave me a spark of courage. The next morning, I went to the flower shop where I worked. My boss, an older woman named Mrs. Harper, noticed my tired eyes. She didn't ask questions, but she put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said, "You look like a woman carrying too much weight. Remember, my dear, flowers only bloom when they're given sunlight. You must find your sunlight again." Her words stayed with me. I realized that I had been living in the shadows of Daniel's choices, but I still had the power to step into the light. That day, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't ready to walk away completely yet, but I would begin to reclaim pieces of myself. I would not let his betrayal define me. I started with small things. I took long walks in Central Park, something I had always loved but stopped doing because Daniel never enjoyed it. I bought myself a sketchbook and began drawing flowers again, something I hadn't done since I was a girl. I even went to a little cafe by myself, ordered coffee, and sat there just watching people go by. It felt strange at first, being alone, but little by little I felt a spark of freedom. Daniel noticed the change. He would ask, "Where were you?" or "Why didn't you wait for me?" But I no longer gave him all of myself. I was beginning to see that I could survive without his approval, without his attention. The more I did for myself, the more I realized how empty our marriage had become. But at night, when the city grew quiet, the pain returned. I would sit on the bed, remembering his betrayal, and the tears would come all over again. Healing, I learned, is not a straight road. It twists, it turns, it pulls you back before pushing you forward again. One night, about a month after it happened, I looked at him across the dinner table. He was eating, talking about his day, pretending everything was fine. And I realized then that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live with a man who had broken my trust and expected me to simply forget. So I said softly but firmly, "Daniel, I think it's time we face the truth. Our marriage is over." He dropped his fork, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't live like this," I whispered. "You broke something in me that can't be fixed. I deserve more than this, and I won't spend the rest of my life pretending." The silence that followed was heavy. I could see anger flicker in his eyes, then fear, then denial. But I stayed calm. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was more afraid of losing myself. And that, my dear ones, was the moment I chose me. It was the first step toward freedom, though I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. Leaving Daniel was not a single moment, my dear ones. It was a process, a slow unraveling of a life that had been tightly wound around his presence. The night I told him our marriage was over, I felt both powerful and terrified. My words were steady, but my hands trembled. For 10 years, I had built my identity as his wife, and now I was stepping into the unknown. At first, Daniel refused to believe me. "You don't mean that," he said, his voice sharp with anger. "You're just upset. You'll calm down and we'll work this out." But I shook my head. I had cried all the tears I had, and now I was empty. "No, Daniel. This time I mean it." In the days that followed, he tried different tactics. Sometimes he pleaded, promising to change. Other times he grew cold and distant, slamming doors and staying away late into the night. But no matter what he did, my heart was firm. I knew I could not go back to being the woman who ignored her own needs just to keep the peace. Moving out was the hardest part. Our apartment was filled with memories, wedding pictures, souvenirs from vacations, little notes we once left for each other. I remember standing in the living room, holding a photo of us on our wedding day. My dress was simple but beautiful, and Daniel's eyes sparkled as he looked at me. For a moment, I almost doubted myself. Was I really ready to let all of this go? But then, like a cruel flash, the image of him with that other woman filled my mind. The kiss, the laughter, the betrayal. And I knew the man in the photograph no longer existed. So, with a heavy heart, I packed my things. Clothes, books, my sketchbook, a few small keepsakes that were truly mine. I left the watch I had bought him on the dresser. I couldn't bear to take it with me. It felt like a symbol of all the love I had wasted. Finding a place of my own in New York was not easy. The city is expensive, and on my modest salary from the flower shop, I couldn't afford much. I ended up renting a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens. It was small with peeling paint on the walls and a leaky faucet in the kitchen, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space that belonged only to me. The first night there, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. I felt lonely but also strangely free. I remember whispering to myself, "You did it. You survived." And in that whisper, I heard the beginning of a new strength growing inside me. Of course, rebuilding was not easy. There were days when the loneliness hit me like a wave. I would walk through Central Park and see couples holding hands, laughing together, and I would feel a sharp ache in my chest. I would lie awake at night, missing the warmth of another body beside me, even if that body belonged to a man who had betrayed me. Heartbreak is tricky that way. It makes you long for what you know is poison. But slowly I began to heal. I filled my apartment with flowers from the shop, bright colors that made the room feel alive. I spent evenings sketching, letting my pencil move across the page until my pain turned into shapes and colors. I joined a little book club at the library, something I had never done while married because Daniel thought it was a waste of time. And for the first time, I made friends of my own, women who listened, laughed, and reminded me that I was not alone in this world. There were setbacks, of course. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had made a mistake. Some mornings, I woke up with doubt, asking myself if I should have tried harder, forgiven more. But then I would remember that hotel, that laughter, that betrayal, and I would remember why I left. One moment I will never forget was when a young woman came into the flower shop one afternoon. She was smiling brightly, her cheeks glowing, as she asked for a bouquet for her anniversary. As I wrapped the flowers, she told me how her husband always surprised her with little notes and gifts, how he made her feel cherished. I smiled for her, but inside I felt a pang of sadness. I wanted to warn her, to tell her not to give her whole self away. But then I realized something. Her story was not mine. And just because my love had ended in betrayal didn't mean hers would too. That thought softened me. It reminded me that not all love is cruel, and not all men are unfaithful. My story was mine alone, and I had to learn from it without letting it harden me completely. One evening, as I walked home from the shop, I passed by the rooftop restaurant where I had booked our anniversary dinner. Couples sat at tables, clinking glasses, laughing under the glow of the city lights. For a moment, I felt tears sting my eyes. That was supposed to be me. That was supposed to be my celebration. But then, instead of collapsing under the pain, I stood taller, because I realized I was still here. I had lost a man, but I had not lost myself. In fact, I was finally beginning to find myself again. And so, my dear ones, that chapter of my life was the beginning of a new kind of freedom. It was not easy and it was not quick. But every small step I took away from Daniel was a step toward the woman I was meant to be. Healing, my dear ones, is not something that happens overnight. It is a slow and often painful journey. After I left Daniel and started living on my own, I thought the worst was over. I believed that once I walked away from him, the pain would fade quickly, like a bruise that heals with time. But I soon learned that heartbreak leaves scars that do not disappear so easily. The truth is, when you give your whole heart to someone and they break it, you don't just lose them, you lose a part of yourself. And so much of my healing was not just about moving on from Daniel, but about finding myself again. At first, I filled my days with work. The flower shop became more than a job. It became my sanctuary. Every morning, I would open the door and be greeted by the sweet scent of roses, lilies, and daisies. Arranging flowers became my therapy. Each bouquet I created felt like a small reminder that beauty could still bloom, even after something had been broken. Customers would smile when I handed them their flowers, and sometimes I felt as if I was giving them little pieces of hope, even while I was still searching for mine. But the nights were harder. Loneliness has a way of creeping in when the world goes quiet. I would sit by my window in Queens, looking at the lights of Manhattan in the distance, and wonder if Daniel was with her. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he regretted what he had done, if he missed the life we once had. Those thoughts were poison, but they came uninvited, and I had to fight them every single day. There were times when I almost picked up the phone to call him. My fingers would hover over the numbers, but then I would stop myself, because I knew what would happen. He would sweet-talk me, make promises, and I would find myself falling back into the same trap. And I refused to go back to being that woman who accepted less than she deserved. One thing that helped me greatly was my little group of new friends from the library book club. We were an odd bunch, different ages, different backgrounds, but somehow we fit together. They didn't know all the details of my story, but they gave me companionship. We would sit in that quiet library, sipping tea and talking about books, and for those hours I felt less alone. It reminded me that life could still be full, even without a husband by my side. Another thing I began to learn was the importance of caring for myself. For so many years, I had put Daniel first, his meals, his clothes, his dreams. I forgot to ask myself what I wanted, so I began to try new things. I signed up for a painting class on weekends, even though my hand shook when I first picked up the brush. I treated myself to little things, fresh pastries from the bakery, a new scarf, a walk through the museum. Each small act was like stitching together the pieces of my broken heart. But healing is never a straight path. There were setbacks. There were days when grief washed over me so heavily that I could not get out of bed. Days when anger boiled inside me and I cursed his name. Days when sadness made me feel like nothing in my life would ever be the same again. And in truth, it wouldn't. But slowly, I began to see that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. One memory stands out from that time. It was a chilly autumn afternoon, and I was walking through Central Park. The trees were turning shades of red and gold, and the air was crisp. I sat on a bench and watched people around me, children playing, couples holding hands, old men feeding pigeons. And I thought to myself, life goes on. Even when your heart is shattered, the world keeps turning. The leaves still change, the sun still rises, people still laugh. It was both a painful and comforting thought. Painful because I realized the world did not stop for my heartbreak, but comforting because it reminded me that I, too, could keep moving forward. During those months, I began writing in a journal. At first, my words were messy, full of anger and tears. But over time, they turned into reflections, lessons, and even little sparks of hope. I wrote about the things I was grateful for, my job, my tiny apartment, my friends, my walks in the park. And slowly, I began to see that my life was not empty after all. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. A man came into the flower shop. He was not handsome in the way Daniel had been, but he had kind eyes. He asked for a bouquet of daisies, saying they were his wife's favorite. As I wrapped the flowers, he told me it was their 15th anniversary and that he wanted to surprise her. His words were gentle, filled with love, and for the first time in months, I felt a warmth in my heart. Not because I wanted him, but because he reminded me that true love still existed in the world. Not all men were like Daniel. Not all marriages ended in betrayal. That moment gave me hope. It reminded me that my story was not over, that maybe one day I could open my heart again. But for now, I knew my journey was about me, about becoming whole again before I could share myself with anyone else. So, my dear ones, part of my healing was learning that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Sometimes being alone is the most powerful thing we can do for ourselves. It is in the quiet of our own company that we begin to hear our true voice. And little by little, I began to hear mine again. As the months turned into a year, I began to notice something. My dear ones, I was changing. Slowly, quietly, like a seed buried deep in the soil, I was pushing my way toward the light. The pain of betrayal was still there, yes, but it no longer ruled me. Instead, there was a new strength growing inside, a confidence I had never known before. You see, when you lose everything you thought you needed, you begin to discover what you truly have. And what I had was myself. For the first time in years, I felt the freedom to make choices for me. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else, just me. One of the first big steps I took was moving the flower shop forward. Mrs. Harper, my boss, had grown older and tired, and she offered to sell the shop. At first, I hesitated. Could I really run a business on my own? But then I thought about how many years I had given to building someone else's dreams while ignoring my own. And so, with courage trembling in my hands, I bought the shop. It was not easy, oh no, money was tight and I had to work long hours, but it was mine. Every bouquet, every wedding arrangement, every little flower that passed through my hands carried a piece of my heart. Owning the shop gave me a new sense of purpose. Customers began to know me by name, and I became part of the neighborhood. I decorated the shop with my sketches of flowers, filling the walls with color and life. I even started hosting little flower workshops for children on Saturdays, teaching them how to arrange simple bouquets. Their laughter filled the shop with joy, and it reminded me that life could still be sweet, even after heartbreak. But perhaps the greatest change was inside myself. I no longer walked with my head down. I no longer felt ashamed of what had happened. Instead, I carried my story with dignity. When people asked about Daniel, I simply said, that part of my life is behind me. I didn't need to explain or defend myself. I had learned that sometimes the greatest strength lies in silence. Of course, healing did not mean forgetting. There were still nights when I lay awake, remembering the betrayal. Sometimes I would see couples walking hand in hand, and a flicker of sadness would pass through me. But instead of bitterness, I began to feel compassion for myself, for my journey, and even, in a strange way, for Daniel, because I realized his choices said more about him than they ever did about me. One day I ran into him. It had been almost 2 years since I left, and I was walking home from the shop when I saw him on the sidewalk. He looked older, tired, and his smile no longer carried the charm it once did. For a moment, my heart skipped, remembering the love we once shared. But then, just as quickly, I felt calm. He was no longer my world. He was just a man I used to know. He tried to start a conversation, asking how I was, saying he missed me. But I only smiled politely and said, "I'm doing well, Daniel. Truly." And then I walked away, leaving him standing there in the crowd. That was the moment I knew I had healed, because instead of anger or longing, I felt peace. In those years, I also learned to love my own company. I would take myself to the movies, sit alone in cafes with a book, wander through the art museum with no one rushing me. I even took a small trip upstate by myself, staying in a little cabin surrounded by trees and silence. For the first time in my life, I discovered the joy of solitude. But let me tell you something important, my dear ones. Healing is not just about finding peace alone. It's also about opening your heart again, even if it's just a little. One evening, during one of my library book club meetings, I noticed a man named Thomas. He was quiet, kind, with soft eyes and a gentle laugh. He wasn't bold like Daniel, and perhaps that was why I felt drawn to him. Over time, we became friends, talking about books, walking through the park after meetings. There was no rush, no pressure, just two souls sharing small moments. I don't know if it was love, not yet, but it was something tender, something real. And it reminded me that my heart, though broken, was still capable of warmth. That was enough for me. So, you see, part 6 of my story is not about the pain of betrayal, but about the strength that grows after it. I learned that I could build a life for myself, one filled with flowers, laughter, and hope. I discovered that I was not defined by what Daniel did to me, but by how I chose to rise from it. And most of all, I learned that even after the darkest nights, the sun still rises. And now, my dear ones, I will tell you how my story ends, or rather, how it continues, because life never truly gives us an ending, only new beginnings. When I look back at that night in New York, when I saw Daniel walk into that hotel with another woman, I realized it was the night that broke me, but also the night that set me free. In the years that followed, I grew into someone I never thought I could be. I built a home of my own, not grand or perfect, but filled with warmth and peace. I turned the flower shop into something more than a business. It became a place where people came not only for bouquets, but for comfort, joy, and sometimes even healing. I cannot count the times when someone walked through my doors, heavy with sorrow or glowing with love, and left with flowers that carried a piece of my heart. I also learned the art of forgiveness, though not in the way many people think. I did not forgive Daniel to let him back into my life. No, I forgave him to release myself from the weight of bitterness. Carrying anger is like carrying a heavy stone. It crushes you little by little. One day, I decided I would not carry it anymore. So I let it go. I wished him peace, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved mine. And what about love? Love did find its way back to me, though not in the same shape as before. Thomas, the quiet man from my book club, became a dear companion. Our friendship blossomed gently, like spring flowers pushing through the soil after a long winter. He was patient, never rushing me, never asking for more than I was ready to give. Over time, I realized that with him I felt safe. There were no grand gestures, no dazzling promises, just steady kindness and honesty. And sometimes that is what true love really is, not fire that burns quickly, but a steady flame that warms you through the years. But whether or not I had found another man, the greatest love I discovered was the love I found for myself. For so many years, I had lived in Daniel's shadow, believing my worth came from being his wife. But now I knew my worth was my own. I learned to look in the mirror and see not a broken woman, but a survivor, not someone abandoned, but someone strong enough to walk away. My dear ones, if there is one lesson my story can give you, it is this. Betrayal may break your heart, but it does not have to break your spirit. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the very doorways to our freedom. Sometimes losing someone we thought we couldn't live without is the only way we discover we were always whole on our own. I will not lie to you, it was not easy. There were nights of tears, mornings of doubt, years of learning and unlearning. But now, when I sit in my little apartment in Queens, surrounded by books, flowers, and the laughter of friends, I feel a peace I never thought I would find again. And every year, when my anniversary date comes around, I do not cry anymore. Instead, I buy myself a bouquet of blue lilies, my favorite, and place them on my table. I smile, not because I forget what happened, but because I remember how far I have come. So yes, he cheated on me the night before our anniversary. Yes, it broke me, but it also gave me the chance to rebuild myself stronger than before. And now, when I look back, I do not see only the pain. I see the woman I became because of it, and that, my dear ones, is the gift hidden inside my sorrow.